I did title my segment Passenger Rail Equals Economic Competitiveness. My day job is I'm the Governmental Affairs and Workforce Director at the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And our mission at the Chamber is to be the advocate for business, and our vision is to foster economic prosperity for a region. And given the title of today's program and the uncertain times that we're in, we have a lot to deal with right now. And at some point, though, we'll be back to dealing with some of the challenges we faced before COVID. And when I moved to Eau Claire in 2002, I found out that there was already an organization here interested in passenger rail and getting it to our community. And you see here our mission, which is to provide leadership and coordination to develop passenger rail service as part of a long-term strategy for sustainable economic growth. And really the efforts here have been led by the business and education communities to try to have our future be bright with being economically competitive. And you can go to the next slide, which shows really where we are if you're not familiar with our part of the state. So if you look about the middle of the slide, you'll see Eau Claire. Eau Claire County has about 100,000 people, and our region around us, we call the Chippewa River Valley, has about 200,000 people. We're 90 miles east of St. Paul. And if you go to the next slide, in the late 90s and early 2000s, Wisconsin was one of the leaders of a 9-state effort, the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative, which was a far-sighted effort to have a system of passenger rail service in the Midwest. And most of us as passenger rail advocates would be excited about this, but if you take a look at the upper part of that map and you see where Eau Claire is, you see a dotted line, and effectively that system proposed a bus connection as our only access to passenger rail service. And so our initial objective was to say, as our fast-growing region, and you go to the next slide, should we be part of the rail passenger network? I mentioned the Chippewa Valley, the St. Croix Valley, which is between us and the Twin Cities. We have some of the highest and fastest growing counties and cities in our part of the state. We have a lot of interest in people from the Twin Cities accessing our area because of housing affordability and quality of life. We have 3 Wisconsin State universities in our corridor, a high percentage of our travel to and from the Twin Cities, and I-94, which parallels the corridor, has over 100,000 vehicles crossing the St. Croix River Bridge at Hudson every day. So there's a lot of travel in the corridor. So if you go to the next slide, initially we have had some success in that effort to be on the map, if you will. It actually started with a Minnesota rail plan, and if you take a look at that map, you see that they have a phase 1 corridor from St. Paul to Eau Claire, really recognizing the sphere of the Twin Cities metro area and significant areas around it. If you look at that report, the Eau Claire corridor had among the highest estimated modal diversion and ridership. And in fact, MnDOT had a hearing in Eau Claire because we were part of this, and we had over 200 people show up for that, which was one of their highest, if not the highest attended. If you go to the next slide, you can see that we also were included in the Wisconsin State Rail Plan when it came out in 2014. But as we all know, just having a line on the map and future planning doesn't necessarily get you a train, especially if you know Wisconsin in the 2010s was not actively interested in expanding passenger rail routes, although the Hiawatha continued to gain ridership and plans were being put in place for expansion there. So if you go to the next slide, you really come back to some of the things I mentioned at the beginning, which was economic competitiveness. We're a small city. We had a unemployment rate before COVID of under 3%. And with our continuing economic growth, and we have had population growth, we see economic competitiveness as a talent issue, being able to bring people to our region. Here you have one of the companies that's been involved in our effort, Rail Credit Union. They are one of the most successful credit unions in the country. They're headquartered in downtown Eau Claire. They have over 200,000 members and $2.4 billion in assets. And you can see their map of their locations. They actually track along our corridor, and they see having a passenger rail system is important to their future to attract talent in Eau Claire. In addition to that, if you go to the next slide, we have other companies like Jamf Software. It was a company founded about 10 years ago in Eau Claire that now has 1,300 employees worldwide. Their headquarters is now in Minneapolis, and just last month they had the largest IPO in Minnesota history. They have a lot of travel of their employees and clients between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities, and have said this would be a real asset to them for their business and for competitiveness. So if you go to the next slide, West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition has really been around since 1999, and as I mentioned, our initial effort was to get on the planning maps. But we said, as we got into the 2010s, what can we do to move this along? And our area actually has a reputation for collaboration and innovation. And we thought that just going to the legislature under that environment and asking for traditional state-supported Amtrak service really wasn't in the cards. And so we said, what can we do to apply innovations and develop new ideas? Can we use public-private partnerships? How can we collaborate? Are there innovations in how you finance this? And we established something called a Passenger Rail Organizing Council. And the time we did that in the mid-2010s, Dave Christensen had just retired from Minnesota DOT, actually a native of our area. And he came along as our executive director and put a team of business people and transportation professionals together to take a look at that. And we said, what if we started with a St. Paul to Eau Claire corridor? And so we started looking at things like innovations. We saw the Brightline service being looked at in Florida with higher frequencies than some state-supported services. And also of course, they already own the land around the stations, but the whole idea of applying the economic activity around the station, transit-oriented development. We actually have an example of that here in the Midwest, in Normal, Illinois, where the investment in the station area there, I understand, has created over $200 million in private investment, 200,000 annual riders there on a multi-frequency corridor in a mid-sized community with a university, which is similar to Eau Claire. And then we've seen how local management and advocacy can have a better service. So management of organizations like the Northern England Passenger Rail Authority or the Joint Powers Authorities in California, and even the Southern Rail Commission down south that has worked on the New Orleans to Mobile service. So you can go to the next slide. So this is the route, if you want to see a little bit closer map of it and some of the potential stations. We would be using the tracks of the Union Pacific Railroad, the Chicago Northwestern and history, for those of you that are familiar with that. And the Union Pacific has actually invested a lot in this corridor with track improvements and PTC signaling. So a lot of things have moved in the direction of it being ready for our passenger rail service. So what we've tried to do is take a look at what could be a broad business plan to establish passenger rail service in our corridor with 4 trains a day, which is what's in the Minnesota rail plan, and do it in a way that could be self-sustaining when you consider all aspects of revenue and expenses. So we thought, let's take a look at whether we can have a public-private partnership with a private developer, an operator, and marketer, both have an incentive to keep costs down as well as to grow revenues. We've also talked with Union Pacific. We met with them last year, and they were open to a concept where if the operator pays a market rate for the slots, it would be treated more like a freight customer, and that they may not require large upfront capital to be able to start the service. We also want to pursue value capture concepts, transit-oriented development, where the economic activity around station sites can help maintain and fund the service. We're looking at the governance structure, and we are looking at creating a multi-county commission along the route. And we would still want to be eligible for federal programs like Restoration Enhancement Grants, CRISI, or even the prospective plan grants that are being considered in Congress right now. So where we are on that, we actually have a private partner who has asked to work with us, Corridor Rail Development. We're in the process of completing financial due diligence and confirming an MOU with them for to be able to move forward. They have indicated to us just in the last few weeks that they have the funding and protocols in place to help have 2 things happen. One is to do the next step with Union Pacific, which is to complete an engineering study to look at the capacity, the route, capital improvements that might need to be made. We have a proposal from HDR to do that for just under $200,000. They have committed to fund that, and then they are planning to use refurbished Santa Fe high-level equipment, which they have working with Rail Plan in the East Coast to do the refurbishment of that. They have told us that if we can move forward on the MOU, that they have the financing being put in place to begin those things next month. There'll be a few months until that study can be done. We need to get our governance body going, but those are the next steps that we're working on. I also happen to be a commissioner on the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, the private sector representative for Wisconsin appointed by the governor last year. And of course, we've been watching the Midwest Regional Rail Planning Study that FRA is doing, and it's clear that the Chicago to Twin Cities corridor is a major corridor there, and we think we can be part of that when a true high-speed service Core Express is created. And finally, you can go to the next slide, which is one that Arun had, and we are excited about having service to the east as well, and we think even though we dismissed a bus connection as part of Midwest Regional Rail Initiative a few years ago, we do think a shuttle connection to Toma as part of TCMC is a great step.
I want to focus on a couple of questions here that are kind of similar. One person asks or says, you know, community buy-in has been really important to your success with the Westlake and double track projects. How do you gain that support and its significance? And for Scott, at the same time, if you can discuss this together perhaps, it's remarkable that trains to Eau Claire, Wisconsin are part of Minnesota's state rail plan. What accounts for the interest and what factors enable the cross-border collaboration?
I'll be brief so Scott can jump in. It's nothing more. You got to start grassroots. This doesn't happen from top down. If you don't have grassroots support, then by the time you won't get support in the General Assembly and give your elected officials traction. They want to know that the local folks are 100% behind it. That's where this got started. You need a champion. Our champion was Congressman Pete Pisklowski. He's fought for this project for 30 years. I would find a champion who's going to hold on to this and work with you to get the local leaders, community groups, business groups, articulate what the vision is, why it's important to everybody, build from that local coalition, that grassroots support, then start building your regional coalition and use your champions to get this pushed through. It's not easy and it takes time, but do that
Sounds
first.
like a great plan. Yeah. Scott?
Yeah, and I'll comment on that as well. When I moved to Eau Claire, I've lived here 18 years now, so it's been a while, but there hasn't been passenger rail service here since 1963, but there is an incredible amount of enthusiasm for regaining it or getting something that was better than before. Even our Northwoods League baseball team is called the Eau Claire Express and has a railroad thing. To the Minnesota, if you take a look at their state rail plan, they did have a vision beyond their immediate state borders. So our corridor performed well, but they also have lines going to Des Moines, Sioux City, Sioux Falls, and Fargo, as well as Duluth Superior, which also touches Wisconsin. So they had kind of a broad vision, and then when they applied the numbers and the travel in this corridor, it scored pretty high as a phase one corridor.